All right, well, it's 1 minute past 3, and folks can continue to join the meeting as they come in, but appreciate you all being here on this first webinar series to talk about what do we do now? Some navigating, planning, both capital and operating, looking at federal funding that's coming down the pike that's already here and stuff that might be coming, how to respond to it. And this will be the first in the series of several on this topic. And just want to thank Mary Filardo from the 21st Century Fund and National Council on School Facilities for taking the time to be on this call she's really the main focus of today's conversation. My name is David Sturtz with Cooperative Strategies, and we'll go ahead and just go through a brief agenda here, let you know what topics we're going to cover, and then part of the conversation here, we would like you all to use the chat function in Zoom, which I'm sure many of us are getting well adept at using in the past few weeks, to, as we go through the presentation, if there's a topic that sparks a particular thought or question, please just populate that in real time as it comes to the top of your mind. And I will punt it to Mary or somebody else on the phone on the call to address. And then at the end, we're going to have some conversation. So we'll have some virtual raisings of the hand. If you have a thought, we can go ahead and chime in. We'll be asking for some of your feedback on preparedness for the fall. So with that, our agenda, just a brief introduction again. This is David Sturtz with Cooperative Strategies, Mary Filardo, 21st Century Fund and National Council on School Facilities. We have folks on this call from industry, folks from school districts, and that's intentional. We want this to be a diverse group, and we hope it to grow, to get some more feedback here on how to be prepared for the fall and beyond in our new environment. So Mary's going to do a brief overview on what passed and what impacts it has for school districts, K-12, in the CARES Act, which really has to do with helping to provide some emergency funds to cover COVID-related expenses directly. This is not having to do with any kind of funding to address broader economic downturn and challenges since COVID hit. That kind of response is being looked at in what's colloquially known as Stimulus 4, and Mary will talk a little bit about what that's working its way through the House, what that might mean, and ways to get involved and what to know about that. Then we will have a discussion on capital and operating planning through 2020, what to look at. And the key thing in preparing for this call with Mary is to document the incurred costs that have been assumed since COVID, and the costs of planning and preparing for the fall, as the current funding and proposed funding that's out there is meant to help reimburse districts for those costs. So documentation is, of course, key. We are going to record this meeting. We're going to take notes as we go along, distribute it to everyone on the invitation list, and set up a follow-up meeting where at the end we'll kind of get to our specifics. What we're hoping to do is start to address a list of preparedness factors coming from school districts and folks who are intimately involved in the workings of school districts, so that the policy decisions are from states and governors and state legislators on how to practice safe social distancing and the like in the fall is informed by those who know it best. So if you all could just go ahead and please mute the phones, and we will go ahead and I'm going to cede the microphone over to Mary, who's going to give us a brief on the CARES Act and Stimulus 4. Mary?
Yeah, thanks, David. This is Mary Filardo, and I'm Executive Director of the 21st Century School Fund. And in that position, have the honor of coordinating the staff for the National Council on School Facilities, which is the Association of State Facility Directors. So part of what I'm going to walk through the CARES Act, but what I want, I'm hoping we can do, this is such a new world for everyone, that I want to go through this quickly, and what I hope we will get to from this webinar and others in the future, but as well from a webinar that we did with our state officials, is a little bit of standardization on what are the anticipated and already occurred expenses and responsibilities, and some of the elements of practice and policy that really need to be in place to be managing these learning environments, indoors and outdoors for, this, when the kids return. So really be thinking about, this. I'm hoping this is more of a working session than a presentation, in that, it's hard to feel like an expert on any of this since it's so new to all of us. So the CARES Act. All right. So on the 27th of March, the House passed this Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It's law essentially from the perspective of K-12 districts. It's about $13.5 billion in an emergency relief fund. That is being, let's see if I can do this. Why don't you go ahead? And so there's this immediate piece, and there are future pieces, and this is where, I think we're not going to probably spend a lot of time on that today, although if you have questions about it, we can talk about it, in part because one of the priorities that folks have talked about for a stimulus is infrastructure. Now, part of that is actually it's become more controversial as it's been out there longer. People saying, well, it wasn't the construction industry that was the hardest hit. And so there's some concern about whether or not that will happen. We think that there will be a part of that in there. And one of the things that we're trying to be sure that industry and districts are organized to do is make sure that public education is very much a part of that infrastructure package with our, enormous school infrastructure. So that is very much in the works, and we hope that you all pay attention to that. And at the end, you'll see there's a website that we have, buildusschools.org, where we are tracking this and really working to engage a diverse community of civic educators, industry, and labor on those issues. So the stimulus 4 is definitely going to happen. It's not at all clear that it will focus on infrastructure or when it'll happen, but we're pretty sure infrastructure will be a part of it. Go ahead on to the next one, David. So in the CARES Act, part of what we are encouraging districts to do, vendors to do, as David said, is you have to document soon and communicate, not just document it, but you have to begin to communicate to your state departments of education, to your governors, what you're seeing, what you're spending, and what you're anticipating to spend. In part, it's this sort of disparate group that you have to communicate to, because there's $3 billion that the governors have, and they can spend it not just on districts, but they can spend it on higher ed, even private schools and charters. There are not restrictions on that, but it's for education relief. In addition to that, the bulk of it is going to be, however, about the $12.5 billion to school districts. In addition to so there's the school district distribution, there's the governor distribution, and then there's about $600 million that is going to be given out from the federal Department of Education to states with the highest coronavirus, the BIE outlying areas, but also for special issues. It's sort of their pot of money to do what they will with. But then there are a couple of other areas that we think school districts, should be eligible for. Across the country, schools are one of the main locations for elections. And in terms of preparing for the November election cycle, we all watched, Wisconsin struggle with their election. But there will be money for election assistance. And to the extent that the schools need to be deep cleaned after or deep cleaned before, or that they might be responsible for having masks or other gloves or something on site. The schools need to be thinking about how they're going to be used and whether or not they're going to have to open more sites so that there's more social distancing during the elections. The schools should be thinking about that now and applying for some of this election assistance. The other has to do with, from FEMA and disaster relief. Again, schools have been used for daycare, for essential workers. Some schools have been used as medical facilities during the COVID virus. There are other ways that they may have expanded their use during the disaster, and may also be eligible for FEMA dollars. Because of course, you want your education dollars to go as far as they can on the education side. To the extent that you can pull dollars from different pots, I think that's going to be very important. So those are also worth looking into, and it will likely again be your governors who will be the advocates for the schools in those areas. But they're not going to know to do it if you're not communicating with them. Go to the next slide, Dave.
Yeah, Mary, actually just a question on that point is, kind of clarifying the points of contact, because my understanding in talking with you is that the primary audience for districts to communicate their need to will be their governors, the states.
Well,
but we also have FEMA here.
Yeah, right. No, but in terms of the FEMA and the election assistance, but it is the State Department of Education are the ones getting most of the emergency relief. So you really, that's where I'm saying it's a lot of communication involved.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think part of what we want to make sure is that K-12 gets some of that $3 billion that the governors have. But and on that, you're going to have to, again, probably work through your chiefs at your state departments of education. But these are, in a sense, and this is partly why I think the work that we need to be working on this call is how to standardize and clarify this so that the governors kind of writ large understand that they should be looking for extra costs associated with opening up more voting places or something such as that. Okay. But I think there was a question, David, that came in on food.
Yeah, there's a question came up, so community services, you see under FEMA, one of the items there is that community services would be reimbursable. These are broad terms laid out here. So right. The question is, would food distribution, for example, visited schools last week and, people are driving through and getting their grab bag lunches. So the costs of doing food distribution to students, is that something that would be reimbursable or potentially reimbursable under this $45 billion in FEMA, or would that be under the governor's education relief, or where would folks turn to that?
Well, of course, I mean, schools are already in their food program get reimbursements for their free and reduced lunch. Mm-hmm. To the extent that they are distributing more, that would be a community service. And so they would want to be documenting either that they're, liberally giving it to anybody that drives through, no matter whether they're students or adults. They would certainly want to document that, and that could absolutely be under FEMA's disaster relief. But this is where, from the perspective of, the end practitioner, the most important thing is documenting what you've done, how many times, what it costs you, and making sure that the governor, the state superintendent, your superintendent, that there's a chain of people with written documentation of these expenses. Mm-hmm. Because, individual districts aren't going to be able to be navigating the FEMA or even the governors. Those are tricky, bureaucracies to get through. So right. The most important thing is documenting it and communicating it, up the chain. But this is where some standard documentation is going to be important.
Right. So above and beyond food costs is, to be above and beyond your standard. That's what you need to document. That's what we can look at for reimbursement. There was also a question that came in about Wi-Fi connections. Like LA documented spending $100 million on devices and hotspots. So above and beyond expenses like that, we're talking more of the governors.
So there's a comment from a B. Wilson on getting food relief. Why don't you?
Yeah,
it'd be great to listen to that person if we could.
Sure. Go for it. Let's see. Let me unmute your phone.
There we go. Yeah,
there
sorry about that. Yeah. We just, all these different emails have been rolling through about, hey, apply for this, apply for that. And so there's a limit of $25,000 per entity. And we've just been filling out any of those that we believe apply to us. And so, we're actually, instead of doing pickup of food, we're doing delivery. So we're delivering 1,100 meals, which is bigger than most districts 2 and 3 times our size. And then we also included some of our technology issues. We purchased 50 additional hotspots, and we're paying the internet costs for those as well. And then we also had some people that needed upgraded laptops from a payroll and accounts payable and so forth. And so those were all included in that application. And I was shocked, amazed, and very pleased that we actually received something, but it really wasn't a hard process. It's just typically we don't have the time for these kinds of grants, but now we have a little bit more time to go after them.
Right. So was it directly from the feds, or were you getting it from your state?
It's federal money that's coming through the state. It's Colorado COVID Relief Fund is what it's called.
Right. 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 And so you were able to apply directly just to your State Department of Education for the funds.
Yeah, it actually didn't go to the State Department of Ed. It went to it's actually coming through the governor's office somehow. Help Colorado Now is where the email was at state.co.us.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was probably part of the $3 billion that the governors got.
I believe so.
Which was quick money. So
right. Very broad use.
Yeah. Yes, very broad use. And supposed to be unnecessarily fast. So did you feel that compensated you for your costs directly, kind of on a one-to-one basis, or are you subsidizing still?
Well, it kind of depends on how you view things. We're paying all of our people through the end of the year, some of whom are not really doing a whole lot, or certainly not working their full hours of their contract. So from that standpoint, it helps. Every little bit helps, but no, it's not one-to-one from a true production standpoint.
Right.
And just for introduction sake, this is Bill Wilson, superintendent of brush schools in Colorado. So smaller district, right? How many schools, Bill?
Yeah.
1,500 students.
1,500 students. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think, John's question about the cost of providing Wi-Fi connections to household without internet service. Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of, again, the governor's emergency education relief fund is it's fast money. It's broad spectrum. So it certainly seems like that connection increased cost.
Yes, you could absolutely do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Through the governor's office.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you want to move to the next?
Let's move to the next one.
Slide. Again, the education dollars. Now these are not as much the governor's dollars, but the education dollars, they really can be used for pretty much anything that you can use your education dollars for now. Title I programs, IDEA programs, technical ed. You see the list there on the screen. As well as they have this catch-all at the end, for implementing activities to maintain the operation and continuity of services and to employ existing staff. So the 12, 13 billion that's going through your state departments of education, different than your governor's dollars, really can be used for your ongoing educational programming. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's
but you notice
John's
capital,
question.
capital is not in there.
Yeah, purchasing educational technology. There you go, to John Poynton's question. Yeah,
connectivity, all kinds of, but you notice there's not capital in there. And this is part of what, in talking to the states, what we were encouraging is that some of your added capital costs would make sense to take to your governor. The governor could absolutely say, well, yes, I'll cover some of these added costs, the increased costs of some of our construction program. Go ahead to the next slide, David. Again, writ large, the funding is going, based on Title I and based on, state issues, as well as some that 600 million that the feds are going to give directly are for the highest hit communities. There is a, supplement, not supplant, where you have to say you're going to continue to fund as much, but there will be waivers on this, and no telling what all of the revenue scene will look like at the public sector side. I know here in Washington D.C. in our school district, there are huge cuts being anticipated, so I'm sure that's going to be true for lots of folks. So whatever that means to continue funding at the same level in order to get these funds, I think there'll be lots of waivers. Go on to the next one, David. So this just gives you an idea of the CARES Act, sort of ahead of the Stimulus Act. It's not huge amounts of funding at the governor's level. So it's really a first in, probably, first come, first serve is who's gonna win. So let's see, where's Colorado in there? Somehow they're not alphabetized. Oh, I know, because they're
bottom left. Bottom left, first column.
I see it. Yeah, so it's only 44 million for the whole state of Colorado. So, what's going to happen is who's ever going to get in there first is going to get it, and then it's going to run out. So, I think on the governor's funding, going in quickly is going to be very important.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, David.
Got it. Yeah. So this
Next
was the
slide,
point where we just wanted to just do a brief overview on the legislation that's passed. Discuss. Hey, there's probably some more coming, and we believe that it's going to impact infrastructure, and it could be big. But full session doesn't reconvene for another 4 days, so we'll have to wait and see. Is there any more insights on Stimulus 4? Anything coming down the pike before we move on to discussion, Mary?
Well, the only thing for, in case folks are not aware of, which they may not be, is that there has already been a Rebuild America School Act that's been passed out of the Education Committee, marked up and sent to the Ways and Means Committee, and it's $100 billion over 10 years for school construction, with $70 billion of it in grants and $30 billion that would be bonds. So it goes directly to states as a block grant, with the idea that the states will distribute it to the school districts with the highest need and in terms of facilities in the lowest wealth communities. It requires better data systems, but its permissible uses are pretty broad in terms of, improvements, replacements, new construction. You can replace roofs with it. You can't do maintenance, what would be operating maintenance and repairs, but you can, replace components or improve it. There's some requirements in terms of trying to ensure that we're getting to be more and more, environmentally sustainable in it. But the idea is to have a light federal touch with strong planning and information requirements at the state and district levels. So that there are, I think 215 co-sponsors in the House. It is not at this point a bipartisan bill, which I think there's one Republican on it and on the House side. And this is where, quite honestly, I think the communities just need to speak up a little bit more, because it's certainly a nonpartisan issue in our districts. I think that we need to see it be more nonpartisan at the federal level. But so that is there, and that is likely what will be wrapped into an infrastructure bill. They will build it off of what they call RASA, the Rebuild America's School Act. And again, if you go to buildusschools.org, you can see the bill itself. It's I think decent policy, which these bills aren't necessarily always.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you. So let's get into a discussion here. Just feedback from the group. So if you, as we were starting this conversation here, you have pipe in on the chat there and unmute yourself, and like to hear from you. Appreciate Bill's feedback there, and his last comment here about, the stimulus dollars, Colorado likely woefully insignificant. Absolutely, 44 million in the entire state is really just a quick money, not sufficient money for the total downturn. So this is the aim right now, is to get discussion about what needs to be a standardized list, or how can we start to standardize the list of incurred and expected expenses, as Mary said, so that we can start distributing those to LEAs and SDAs, just to give some continuity to these asks around the country, because the bills are coming so fast, and it's going to be hard to translate all these needs without some kind of standardization. So let's just talking capital here. Would like to hear from anybody who's currently implementing some capital programs right now. Do you have construction projects going on? Do you have renovations projects going on? Either if you are a vendor and working on a project, you're an architect, you're an engineer, or you're a school district, you're an owner, and you have projects. Does anybody have some experience about current project delays, how they're addressing them, that they could share for the good of the order?
This is John from Adams 14. We have an elementary school construction project underway. We broke ground about a month ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm not aware of any delays at this time, but we've been advised that the labor pool may be impacted in the very near future if the coronavirus continues to expand and infections go up where people are gathering and working, which could slow the project. But I'm not aware of any delays at this point.
So far, so good. But if the labor pool
what's
starts
your
staying home,
state? What
Colorado.
State are you from?
Also,
I beg your pardon, Mary. I'm from Colorado.
Yeah.
And it is perhaps the state's Colorado's the highest proportion of low-income students in the state, in this district. So it's highly impacted by poverty.
So John, yours was a question about connecting Wi-Fi connections. So are you currently providing hotspots?
Yes, we are. We've distributed over 3,000 devices, Chromebooks, to families. And we're also distributing now hotspots. We're planning to distribute at least 700. And we're working through that first round uh, of distributions now. And we're also expanding our pipeline to handle the added demand for connectivity or bandwidth. So we've already done that. So that's an additional expense, and probably an expense that we didn't initially think about. We were so concerned about the cost and the availability of the modems itself.
Right.
But here's yet another cost is making sure that, okay, once the modem is installed in someone's home, do they have the bandwidth? Is the system pipeline big enough to provide that additional
secondary costs, tertiary costs, all those that are associated with it? Yeah.
Precisely.
So have you documented that? Have you documented that and calculated it up to send up to your governor, who was so generous to the other Colorado districts?
Now we have an individual on our staff that is documenting all the additional unforeseen costs. And so after I get off this phone, I'm going to check with that individual and see, what other things might not be included on the list that we should include.
Yeah.
Well,
But I would also, my guess is also that getting it out there soon is going to be key, right?
Mary, yeah, I'm hearing that, and I really appreciate that. And I want to thank Cooperative Strategies and Susan Miller for alerting me to this webinar, because we are so busy right now putting out a multitude of fires at sort of first order response issues. So your words are not lost on me. I'm going to quickly get back with staff, and I've made screenshots of these slides, and I'll be sharing those and encouraging us to come up with an official request immediately.
Yeah.
I think we had somebody else piping in here.
So Debbie from Virginia, and we're a small school division. I guess about 2,500 students. And our biggest problem on the internet is we have a one-to-one device program. So every child, third grade and up, walked out of the school on the last day with their device. So that wasn't a problem. The problem is that a third of our community can't get internet service. So we have a program of about 150 hotspots that we deploy every year to those that need it. But a lot of them have to turn it back because they can't use it at their home. So we've been making use of free Sprint and AT&T devices that have been made available to us, but still we have such weak service areas. So we put extra hotspots in our parking lots so we can service about 50 at a time just sitting in a parking lot. We're going to see, we've sent that information out today for people just so that they're aware of that. But we just deployed new instructional materials. We're closed down through the end of the school year. And we just deployed a quarter's worth of paper documents to those third of our students that can't get internet. So we pushed everything else out to our staff, our students with our educational platform, Schoology. But the lack of internet access is what's going to kill us. And we've just got depressing news from our state health department that the modeling shows that we might not peak until August. We've managed to pause the coronavirus spread. And by pausing it, it means that the peak is going to come possibly as school starts. So we're having to think about making plans for school go, no go in the summer, and then school go, no go come August. So we have so much up in the air right now from an instructional perspective. when you talk about the capital projects, we are just about to sign a contract for a parking lot expansion. Much needed. We've been, the county has gone ahead and funded about half of it. We had half of it sitting, waiting for them to fund the second half. Our concern is our local construction company financially solvent enough to, handle a $1.3 million project. So I've looked at the financials, and I know that they're very, very run a very thin profit margin over the last couple of years. And I know that they have equipment, so I know that they don't have to purchase the equipment. So I didn't know if you guys had any feel of that I've got a meeting with them tomorrow, a Zoom meeting, of course. And before we sign this contract, I need to get warm fuzzies from them.
Well, I think, one of the things that, obviously in these kinds of situations, it sounds like this is a contractor you've worked with before.
No.
Is that right?
Never,
you haven't?
They are local, and so I think they're going to employ local folks. And I think from a reputation perspective, they're going to want to do a good job.
Right.
So that's our hope. They came in low bid. Virginia, we had to take the low bid. But we all indications are that we did our homework on the reputation. They should be okay. It's just a parking lot.
Well, one of the things that you might want to ask them, because this is one of the things that we have heard about from other construction sites, is are there other, when they put their bid in, there were not, requirements to social distance or check the temperature of anybody walking on site, or, we were not in this world probably.
Right.
And so you might want to ask them, do they anticipate any added costs associated with the, kind of essentially Virginia and everybody else being in a health crisis, and get them to think about it early, and also ask them about if they've got their equipment, that's good, but in terms of their supplies and materials, do they, are they seeing any supply chain issues? Have they experienced them? And just kind of raise the problems early. And then in terms of their labor pool, do they, how much of their labor, how many people have they had to lay off? Have they applied even for some of the grants for small businesses to help them with their situation? I mean, they should have an honest back and forth with you, and, your ability, if they're, really performing, your ability to quick pay is going to be really important to them at this time. So, I think some of that discussion in terms of helping them understand how they get quick pay from you, and then what you need to be reassured in terms of, the procedures they're going to be using on site, and whether or not they're anticipating issues with either their labor or their material supply chain would be important to understand.
Cost and time, what's the anticipated timeline? It's probably developed pre this nonsense. So what does that look like now? Yeah.
So
Angela had a comment too. Angela, why don't you, let's see if you can, I'm missing it. Can you bring Angela on? She had a good suggestion in terms of a contract provision, I think, that she was highlighting.
Go ahead, Angela.
Can you find her?
Yeah, so out here in California, there's, with the stay-at-home order and ongoing construction housing operation projects, there's a legislation called N-33-20, where it states that contractors need to update their injury and illness protection plan, followed by health assessments and social distancing policies in order to continue the projects on school facilities. So that might be something that you can ask the contractor if they have available, so you can look at that and plan for any creep issues if their suppliers or staff do not show up to work.
Right. So I went through the contract. Of course, we bid it out in January, and pre-COVID-19. The one thing I did strike on the contract that they would be signing is there was a provision that allowed them to terminate if there was a national emergency. And so I just go, strike that baby out. We are in a national emergency. And so if they're going to sign this contract, they can't use that as an excuse. But we have just a general statement that says that they're abiding by all local, state, national laws. And so that was going to be my question. Did they know if there were any laws?
Well, and we have a little bit of static there, but that's a good question. We just got a chat, if people can see, from Connie, from California, saying that in your district, and Connie, could you speak for a second? That your school, you are requiring your contractors to follow social orders and safety measures. Could you just speak briefly on that topic?
Hi, everybody can hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Connie, we can.
So what we did is we make sure that if possible, the contract at school side, make sure keep it 6 feet apart. And then we make sure that they have a sanitizer station in the job site, and also any safety measure so that the contractor can be, workers at the school side can access. And also before the project started, we'll contact the company, make sure that the employee on the job site, they have no symptom for the COVID-19. And it is contractor responsibility to monitor on a daily basis.
And Connie, is this something that you've actually put in contractual language, or is this sort of a memorandum of understanding? Is it sort of a verbal agreement? How did you communicate this to the vendor?
So we started with the verbal communication, and we are at LA County, and LA County starting April 15, we have a very strict order, including everybody supposed to wear the facial mask in all the public area. So we also require the post in all our school facility. So because of that, we're starting April 15. We also require all the school district contract who come to our site to do that. So we have not updated the district policy yet because we all work at home, but this will be the next step we're going to do.
Got it. Okay.
Right, and this is an issue for the contractors, because if they have to supply masks to all their employees, if they have to take temperatures, if they have to manage working conditions and their productivity at 6 feet apart, then they will be incurring added costs. And the issue is whether or not they can submit to you change orders that say, these are our added costs, and so we're going to charge you for them. These were not certainly anticipated in our contract bid. These are new, and truthfully, this is partly why, getting to your governors and in Virginia as well, to say, okay, we've done this $1.3 million project, but it costs us another $20,000 because of this, and so we're going to submit the bill to you. Whether or not it'll fly or not, I don't know, but I think that it's the kind of thing that we have to put out there, because within the budget decision-making structures, people have got to understand the real costs to what's been going on, and make sure that your parking lot project isn't necessarily having to carry all those costs.
Right. So, Mayor, I think this is a time to, looking at the clock here, we scheduled for another 15 minutes. And just the next question beyond like what you have incurred and what you have done, is there districts out there or someone on the line who's looked at what your November plans. Anybody have a November election that they were planning for that now they have made a decision either to continue down the path, to wait, see, to cancel and move to a special election in May? What's some thinking right now on sort of the major capital funding? And then we're going to pivot into sort of the final 10 minutes or so on operational readiness for the fall, and then we want to have a follow-up meeting specifically on that topic. And while somebody's chiming in on that, we had a comment from our CEO about looking at, if you want to look in the comments there, checking the company cash flow document. You mentioned, Deborah, not knowing whether or not this company had the capacity to be solvent. So there's documentation that shows that they can get a stamp of approval that they are a financially solvent operation, and can they produce anything that proves that? So anyway, moving forward.
By the way, I just saw a way to save that chat. So all your great suggestions, I will look over carefully before I have this conversation tomorrow with the company.
Yeah, we will send out notes as well. So good call. And then Michael Elliott from the state of Oregon just made a comment. We have the opposite problem in Oregon. We have several districts that were seeking a bond in May and just adopted temporary rules to allow them to shift to November. So that's interesting. So that May is certainly inopportune. So November looks like the next best thing. Interesting. Any other folks who have personal experience with capital planning for the fall or spring they want to discuss?
I mean, what we know from looking at data from Bond Finder is that there are many, like in Oregon, there are many districts that are postponing their bonds. Mm-hmm. And of course, what that is it's got a huge impact on the pipeline, the construction pipeline. Even a 5 month delay means that those 5 months projects that were going to be getting up and running, ready to go, those are real delays. So in terms of an economic impact in communities and jobs and everything else, these delays are going to have an impact. And what the sort of pass rates will be, I don't know. I looked at the Wisconsin pass rates, and I was struck by the fact that I think there might have been 14 bond issues or something like that on the ballot, and all but 2 passed. So I thought that was pretty good for Wisconsin. That was not the case in California's March 3rd bonds. There were I don't know, about almost $8 billion worth of failed bonds, and $5 billion that passed, and plus a $9 billion for K-12 state bond that failed. So there was close to $18 billion of failed construction dollars for California, and only 5 that passed. So it was definitely looking better in Wisconsin than it did in California. So not quite sure what was going on there, but the delays are going to have an economic impact as well.
Yeah,
as,
Mary, I don't know if it's too early to share, but you're doing some research where you have a data set right now on historic bond passage rates. Could you just give a 30 seconds on that study and when that might be released?
Well, what we're doing, we went into a partnership, the National Council did, Michael, with Bond Finder, and they're providing us bond data back to 2008, and we're, by district. And so we're just in the early stages of looking at that data. And so what we were most interested in right now is kind of what's happening right now. So we don't have this historic information on it, but we will, by the fall. We'll have an analysis as part of our State of Our Schools 2020 that we'll make available.
Perfect.
So let's talk about
the
nightmare of the reopening.
Before we get on to the reopening, this is John, and I have a very quick question.
Sure.
On this issue of ballot initiatives. in our district, we have approximately 66,000 students and 11 schools. All but one of the schools is very dated, extraordinarily old, all of them. And, but we're in a very difficult position in terms of being able to pass a bond to rebuild our schools for a variety of reasons. But I'm wondering now, based on the conversation, if the Rebuild American Schools initiative might become bipartisan if it gets tied into sort of a stimulus project to get people back to work. And would Republicans maybe get on board for that reason? Any thoughts about that? And then sort of tied into that question is, does anyone see opportunities for a district such as ours, which is extraordinarily high needs, high poverty, high needs district? Is there some kind of opportunity that might exist in this scenario for?
I mean, it really, John, it really is, that is the whole heart and soul of the Rebuild America School Act. It is, because it's money to the state, and even like if it were distributed to the districts, your district wouldn't even get enough to rebuild a school, right? And so the idea is that the state can give dollars to local districts to rebuild in a comprehensive way where you've got the highest need. So that, I mean, it is what we realize is that we kind of need a Title I for our school buildings. And so it would be, your district would be exactly the district that it would be directed towards. Now there's a requirement for a state share of at least 10%, but what state are you in, John?
Colorado.
Yeah, so there already is a state program. So frankly, what you would have the ability to do is leverage the federal dollars to get the state dollars. Because part of what happens is we've seen in many states, the districts are so poor, they can't even raise the dollars to get state dollars, even though like in New York State, you can get up to 10%. You know, all you have to do is 10%, and then you get 90% from the state, but there are districts that can't do the 10%. So, so this is entirely what the Rebuild America Schools Act is for, but you know, we really need the local communities and the districts making their case, particularly to the Republican congressmen and senators. I mean, it's just what it is. But, you know, I learned a lot from working with Wyoming when they said, well, the money in Cheyenne was theirs, and so that's why they couldn't tell them what to do. I'm thinking, well, no, actually the money in Washington is ours, you know, all of ours too. So if we need it for schools, well, then let's spend it on schools. So
Mary, this is Scott Newell, the CEO of Cooperative Strategies. You know, you are you're a champion for schools and saying we need to reach out to our congressmen and our governors, et cetera. For a lot of us on this call and folks we might talk to after this call, that's sometimes a difficult task. I know you're very successful at doing that and also have some current mechanisms that at least allow people to sign up to lobby for or do other things in their capacity. Could you maybe just take a moment and either explain some of the resources you have now to allow folks like us and folks we know to either endorse or support or spread the word, and then maybe at the conclusion of this, we can circulate some information too.
Yeah, no, that would be great. There is and maybe at the very end of it, we can, you know, David could pull it up on the screen. I can tell you where to find it, but there is a letter actually right now that's open until April 22nd of, you know, the major ed groups and a lot of industry groups have signed on to it. You know, the PTA and the National School Boards Association and the NEA and others have all signed it. But what we are looking for is more local representation on it. I mean, LA Unified signed on and Durham Public Schools signed on, but it would be great to have some of the smaller districts, you know, who could represent their interest and concern in public school construction in the stimulus, in a COVID stimulus package. And and you know, I can point you to it, and maybe we can even bring it up on screen, because you
Yeah.
can just go to the website and you can sign on to the letter.
Mary, we're going to send
But
out this recording to everybody with some notes and looking at scheduling a next one. We'll include the links there so that everybody can just have it in their inbox.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that David and I wanted to be sure to do is look at what might be coming down the pike in terms of what are going to be requirements on reopening. And initially, and we sent something out, you know, on behalf of the National Council on, you know, kind of deep cleaning and disinfecting, and, you know, some guidance and resources on that. And, you know, I think, you know, folks have learned a lot. I think there's still some concern, you know, are we doing it right? But it's one thing to do it in an empty building. It's another thing to do it in a building that's going to be occupied by, you know, kids and adults. And then, but the other thing that just is coming up is this notion that the schools are going to have to create social distancing in the reopened schools. Anyway, this is sort of partly what's in actually a Virginia guidelines, and I made it a little bit shorter, but these are the kinds of things that school districts, I think, may be asked to do when they reopen. And I think that this is where this group and others really trying to think this through is going to be important. So, you know, kids 3 feet apart, I mean, unless you've got classes of 15 to 20 in all of your classrooms, you're going to have a hard time in a standard classroom. You know, limiting interaction, rotating teachers instead of students, you know, canceling, you know, your gym classes, and suspending other, you know, key activities, suspending transportation or staggering openings, modifying school hours, alternating. These are really, really major space planning and district planning and scheduling issues that will just not come naturally, and they're not obvious sort of how any one or all of the schools are going to manage them. So I just am wanting folks to be, you know, my brother always says, he's a project manager, he says, worry early. And so I'm wanting everybody to worry in April about what it's going to look like in September if there is no vaccine and people are saying we have to social distance in the schools. You know, this is only part of it. There's one more thing, the Minnesota piece that has, you know, hand washing, regular hand washing. You know, again, how do you do that in many of our old schools that hardly have, you know, bathrooms to a floor, you know? So anyway, I'm going to stop with that. That's really
so what
probably you write it next.
Yeah, when Mary and I were talking about this one, we think that we're going to have another webinar, or likely what we're looking at is a series of webinars specifically on this topic about readiness for the fall come what may, knowing that some of the operational norms and policies will change if indeed we're able to open up in the fall, and just having contingency plans there. And one of the things that, as we were preparing for this call, was quite apparent is that the guidance that's starting to come out now on these things are coming from states. And they're going to run up against some significant challenges. You know, student desks at least 3 feet or 6 feet apart. I saw it, and we saw it in another states' guidance. Well, you know, if you have a classroom of 700 square feet and desks are 6 feet apart in all directions, and you've got fixed furniture in there, that may not be physically possible in some cases. So how do you start getting ahead of that? The fact that what you're likely looking at is drop in instructional time in order to have these new procedures implemented cleaning, how often do you clean, with who's doing it, when, staggering starts, all that is just a whole lot more to add. And one of the things that we wanted to do was start a conversation with folks who are working in the schools, states, at the state level, vendors, and then see the conversation so we can come back with some thoughts in mind and start to generate these lists of potential policies there that are realistic from the user's perspective to send up to the states. So that's part of a look at for future webinar in this series. So, we are getting right here close to time. And so just look for an upcoming message from us for an invitation to a follow-up on this webinar rather. And we do hope to get everybody back with some thoughts that you can put to paper beforehand on some of these protocols that we can look for the fall. That's one thing. Second thing, as Mary said, is we're looking to build a list of standardized already incurred and expected expenses so that you all as districts could get reimbursed for these unexpected costs in a systematic and expeditious way. So we'll send some thoughts on that.
And David, if you don't mind, our next two, just for you folks or anybody we're going to be broaching the subject of occupying in the fall, and planning now how you look at capacity differently, all these things that when we're getting some direction from our states and our government on what that could look like, how to kind of plan for that now and maybe assess your spaces now so that you can anticipate that over the summer months. Mm-hmm. We're having a superintendent, some teachers, and some students just talk about the methodologies that they're using right now for online learning and how that might translate into some kind of in-person and blended space in the fall, and just kind of hear from across the country some folks on how they're doing it across the country, pick up any tidbits. And the last one that we're doing in the short term is about financing, and it's twofold. One, hear from some CFOs, some CBOs from across the country on what's been impacted in their states right now, what they're anticipating the next couple of years are going to look like when state taxes have not come in the way they planned, and rescissions and all that, and how that might affect schools, and plan for them now. But also look at maybe some opportunities for creative financing or leveraging federal dollars, state dollars for programs to get your school projects done.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So first of many on these topics, and certainly the goal here is to crowdsource the solutions because no one of us has them. And so that's why our role here is to have and continue conversations, to listen, to write them down, and to focus in on the questions we need to ask. So those are some of the questions that we're asking. How do we pivot and be ready operationally for the fall? And we're talking about distance learning, as Scott mentioned, and other things. And then accounting for our occurred expected expenses. We've seen several of your comments here coming in about concern about whether or not you actually will be physically capable of complying with social distancing regulations in the fall. So those are things that we want to address. So we are just a minute over time. I want to thank you all again for joining this conversation. There will be more, and so watch your inbox. Look forward to continued updates. We'll send you the notes, and please invite some others who you think can be a part of this conversation and help us get ready for the fall when we meet again. So with that, everybody stay safe. Have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Mary, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you everyone for all the work that you're doing with our school districts. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary.
Okay. All right, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.